Despair. Pull the trigger. Harry admits that he was the first in his squadron to pull the trigger in anger. He recalls the night when it occurred. The red phone rang in the VHR tent. They went through their checks, took off, and then moments later they saw the target area. Thermal smudges walking from where the contact had been. His colleague, Dave, explained that has to be them. They checked that there were no friendly patrols in the area, and they flew above the 8 hotspots. They broke into 2 groups of 4, and they were evenly spaced, moving slowly along a track, and Harry queried whether they were mimicking the Allied patrolling technique. Then they jumped on some mopeds and they sought permission to fire. Harry explained what weaponry was available to them, talking about the 30mm cannon, 2 Hellfires, and also 50-kilogram guided missiles that could be fitted with different warheads. There are also some unguided air-to-ground rockets also. And he explained the method of firing these weapons. They waited, and they were waiting for the permission to be granted to fire, and it didn't come. Harry was getting more annoyed about the fact that they'd not been given this, and if there had been if he found out at a later juncture if somebody had been injured or killed by one of these individuals after they had effectively let them go, he would be less than happy, although quite how he'd worked that out, I don't know. There were 2 motorbikes. They split up. He followed one, and Control asked them what the status was, and they explained that most of them had gone because they'd been so slow in coming back to them. And then they were granted permission to fire. Dave suggested to use the Hellfire, and Harry instead used the 30mm cannon instead. And they hit the motorbike. One man went down, but the other one hopped off and ran into a building. And they circled around, but Harry explained that he admitted that he should have used the Hellfire, would have been easier to do it. And he was explaining that this was his most direct contact with the enemy at this juncture. He asked himself how he felt. He wasn't traumatized, he wasn't sad, he wasn't surprised. He was just prepared for it. He was doing his job. He explained it was simple maths, in effect. He asked himself if he was being callous or desensitized, but he felt that his non-reaction was connected to a long-standing ambivalence towards death. Ultimately, he just decided that it was down to maths. These were bad people doing bad things, and therefore he needed to remove these individuals. He'd either killed British soldiers or would be likely to try and do so, and therefore he was saving British lives. Taking out somebody like this meant fewer young men and women being wrapped up and shipped home on hospital beds. And therefore, his main thought that day was only that he'd wished the controller got back to them sooner. Thereafter, he moves into another chapter talking about how the drones had been watching the Taliban school its fighters. He explains the Taliban actually had good equipment, and they had frequent tutorials in the desert, getting the newest gear supplied by Russia and Iran. He was in the VHR tent, the red phone rang, down went the coffee mugs and the PlayStation controls, and they ran to the Apaches. And again, he basically provides us with an explanation of the contact that occurred. This time it was a training camp, and they went after the instructor, who was a high-value target on a motorbike. And therefore, they fired a missile, and interestingly, of course, Unsurprisingly, he states, the thumbstick I fired was remarkably similar to the thumbstick for the PlayStation game I'd just been playing. Now, interestingly, of course, there are those that say that Harry wasn't involved in any contact with the enemy. He was known as Bunker Harry, and he was protected by the Gurkhas. This detail that he provides about contact with the enemy and how he feels about it, do you accept that this actually happened, or do you think this has just been added in to make it seem like he had contact? Also, where did the information come from about him not having involvement on the actual front line and actually seeing battle of some description? He moves on to the next one, explaining that it'd be hard to be precise firing the Hellfires, talking about how targets would move too fast and the window of opportunity being short. And he would give more detail about it, where this time it was a Taliban commander who was hiding behind a child, apparently, but this time he took a shot and hit a motorbike. There's a lot of shooting people on motorbikes, clearly, or blowing them up. And then they saw the body to the right of the motorbike, and it was a confirmed kill, and they flew away. Short chapter, all very much matter of fact. Then in the next chapter, he talks about being brought out to the same forlorn place, a string of bunkers overlooking a busy highway. Then the fact was that they had intel that Taliban fighters would regularly meet there, sometimes maybe about 30. But 3 times they went there and to engage, and 3 times they failed to get permission to fire, but he never knew why. And he got there and saw that there were men taking aim. Harry describes it as bad things were going to happen. They sought to get permission to engage, but it was denied. And then all of a sudden there was a boom and a huge flash and an explosion on the road as the Taliban opened fire on somebody. And they saw that the lorry was blown to pieces and saw that men were running around and they were begging for permission to fire. This time Harry saying that it wasn't requesting permission to stop an act, but rather to address an act which was just witnessed. And that kind of permission is apparently called 429 Alpha. And they sought permission, but they were told to stand by. They kept on following the motorbikes, and he explained that he didn't really understand the underlying geopolitics or the big picture, that there were concerns about, some commanders had expressed their concerns about, for every Taliban killed, 3 more would be created. But Harry felt there had to be a better answer than just floating in the air while innocents got slaughtered. And again, he never got permission. So he conveys some of the frustration that's experienced in these engagements where permission to engage the Taliban was not granted. Again, reasonably interesting, talking about what it was like out there, assuming, of course, those things happened. And one would have to assume that they did. And I think if he'd have focused on a book all about his military engagements and how that went about, I think people would have a better conceit of him. And it would certainly be more interesting than the bleating about his mother and the press. There's more this time, but going on about his killing in the next video. Join me there.